Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game.
You're listening to PTCG Radio.
Now, first things first, this week I have a little bit of a throat thing. Don't exactly know what it is, so if I sound a little bit weird this week, or I start coughing a lot, or I sound like I might have died while recording this podcast, it goes blank for a quite a long period of time, it's absolutely fine. I'll get over it. I'll be fine in the morning. Just to warn you. So this week there is quite a lot of exciting news, and it's all based around the new Boundaries Cross set that comes out. I will be doing a full rundown of this set, a full review of this set next week, but for the time being, if you really want to know about the set, it's the same as the Cold Flare Blue something or other set that was released in Japan a while ago, and I did deal with that set in one of my earlier podcasts. If you go back and look for that one, I go through the entire Japanese set. Next week I will be looking at some of the most exciting cards in this set, I should say, but this week there are more pressing issues at hand. And then towards the end I will give you a report of the Battle Road I attended just last weekend. So, starting off this week, there are some small pieces of news which I think are moderately interesting and worth sharing with you. The first piece of news is that we are getting some Evolutions promos, which are going to be our promos for the Premier events this year. In the same way we got Excelgor and Escavalier lines last year, we are getting Evolutions this year. And what is kind of cool is we are getting different promos depending on what regional it is. So, Eevee is going to be the Cities promo. Jolteon was last weekend's Regionals promo, which I'm assuming a lot of you are going to get. And Vaporeon and Leafeon, I believe, are going to be the other two promos that you'll be getting at regionals. Sorry, Vaporeon and Flareon are going to be the other two regionals. You are going to be getting Umbreon in your states in March, and you'll be getting Espeon coming along as your Nationals promo. Now these are the Dark Explorers ones, so they are just exact reprints, same art and everything, but they have got the Pokémon Championship Series logo punched onto them to mark them out as promos. And I think this is kind of cool. We all like Evolutions. It's also nice that Pokemon are recognising that there are 3 different sets of regionals, so they're giving us 3 different promos for that, and I think that's kind of cool. If you are living in the UK, we are, as it stands at the moment, unless something changes, we're not actually having any state championships. All of our state/regionals are going to be regional, so that means, and this is quite bad news for me because I'm an Umbreon fan, we're not getting the Umbreon promo. Now, I'm not saying that there's no chance whatsoever that one of these regionals isn't going to run the States promo, but I'm saying that as it stands at the moment, it is unlikely that we will be getting this States promo. So hit up your friends in the US, and if there's anyone listening in the US that, wants to offer me a Umbreon promo, get in touch on Twitter at @TheWassy, and you never know, we might be able to work something out. Another kind of cool little piece of news is that little one-pack blisters have been released for Boundaries Crossed, as they are for a lot of them. And these ones, we are getting a new Pikachu promo. It's already been released in Japan, but it's new to us. And with that, you'll get the Next Destiny's Raichu as a special a special regular holo, not the new style holo, the old school holo. And you'll be getting an LGM promo, which again was released in Japan previously, and a Beheeyem special promo. It's the old school holo like we're used to before Black and White, not the new style Black and White promos. And a couple other little small pieces of news. There is a new completely holofoil mini set coming out in Japan. Now, last January, that's when Dragon Selection, which recently became our Dragon Vault set, came out in Japan. This January, Japan are getting Shiny Collection. It's going to be 15 boosters per box, all holographic cards, but 4 cards per pack rather than 5. I'm not sure exactly how many cards will be in this. I don't believe it has been confirmed yet, but you should be expecting about 20 cards. There has been one promotional image released for the set, and the writing is quite, I think, girly is the only way to describe it, and there's a lot of pink there, and the Pokemon shown, we've got Pikachu, we've got Gardevoir, Meloetta, Eevee, Piplup. So you've got the kind of cute and cuddly Pokemon. When I look at that, it just makes me happy, because that suggests we're getting a new Piplup, and if we cross our fingers really hard, we might even be getting a new Empoleon in that set. We can but hope. It's coming out in January, and it's called Shiny Collection, so there'll be more news on that closer to the time. And the last little piece of news, Spiral Force and Thunder Knuckle Black and White 8, the new Japanese Pokemon set, which is being released on December the 14th. We've been given a little bit more information. We are told that Team Plasma cards are going to become more powerful with this set. We are told that some Pokemon from the TV show are going to appear. We're told that Thundurus' Fairy form will appear as an EX card, and that mirrors the fact that Landorus' new form is an EX which has already come out, and we're getting in Boundaries Crossed in a few days. The product description alludes to Deoxys' forms, and there are going to be 51 cards per set, which makes 102. Do remember, however, that in the Japanese sets they always have a bunch of secret rares, and that their full art EXs are secret rares in their sets, whereas they're not in ours. So that 102 will most likely turn into nearer 115, 120 in total. So that's the little news this week. There is, however, some quite big news. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit aggrieved about this, I suppose is the right way to say it. I've been giving Pokemon a lot of props recently. They've been giving us good pre-release promos, and I've been making sure to point that out. They've been giving us good tin promos. I've been singing the praise of Pokemon, and I've been defending Pokemon from a lot of negative criticism they get, which I think is quite unfair. However, they've been receiving criticism this week, and I think it's quite fair. They have changed some of the cards around in Boundaries Crossed. Now, Boundaries Crossed is the Japanese set that's coming out, that came out a few months ago. We're getting it almost card for card, so we can look and we know what we should be getting. And looking at the Japanese set, we should be getting some trainers. We should be getting a trainer called Bicycle, which allows us to draw cards until we got 4 in our hand. Now that is like a weaker Bianca, but it's a trainer card, which means if you draw that off an end late game, you're going to get 4 more cards, etc. It's a very useful trainer. It's one that people can be creative with. We should also be getting Escape Rope, which is a different name, but other than that, it is an exact reprint of Warp Point. You switch your Pokemon with one of the ones on your bench, just like Switch, and your opponent has to switch as well, kind of like an old energy circulator combined with Switch. It saw a lot of play back when it was Warp Point. It opens up some creative plays. It's kind of like a Switch with an added bonus. Sometimes it can add as a 5th Pokemon catcher. When your opponent has got, say, 1 Sigilyph up, you can play an Escape Rope and they have to put something up that can be hit by your EX. Or if they've got 1 Pokemon tanking that you can't KO, but you can KO anything on their bench, again, you could have played an Escape Rope and force them to switch their Pokemon, guaranteeing that you're going to get a KO. We should be getting Burbank City Gym, a new stadium which ups the amount of damage done by poison between turns. Now, to be fair, this is going to be mostly useful for the next set, Team Plasma's Crobat, that we're getting, but it still could be useful for something like a Moongus, where you evolve your Foongus to a Moongus and the opponent's active Pokemon becomes confused and poisoned. And we should be getting what was probably my pick to be the number 1 card in the set, and that is Ether. Ether allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and if one of them is a basic energy card, you get to attach it to any one of your Pokemon. We were supposed to finally be getting Universal Energy Acceleration. Now, what this would have done is many things. What this would do, I should say. What we're going to be seeing is Darkrai is still going to rule. They've got Dark Patch. Eels are still going to rule. They've got Electrix Dynamotor. The new deck, which I'm going to talk more about next week, which is supposed to be coming around with a new set, is Blastoise Caldeo, and that uses Blastoise's ability, which allows you to put as many water energy down a turn as you like. All of these decks have one thing in common, and that is they've got energy acceleration. Now, I did at 3 Battle Roads, I believe, I played a Mewtwo Terrakion. list. I managed to get 3rd place in Nottingham and 4th place in St Austell with it. It was a deck that I liked, but as you'll hear in my Battle Roads report later on in this podcast, I abandoned this deck, and the reason I abandoned it was Hammers is starting to come about. And if you're playing a deck like Mewtwo Terrakion, if you play against a Hammers list, unless they really don't run or they really whiff their crushing hammer flips, these games are almost impossible to win. So we are heading towards Darkrai, Eels, and maybe Blastoise Caldeo, although, as I'm going to tell you next week, I don't believe this deck is going to be able to stand up. Now, this isn't a great format for me. I want a little bit more creativity than this. Stage 1s are already basically going down the pan, as are Stage 2s, because we can play 4-catcher and just pick them up before they evolve. Big Basics are the only real place where creativity can go now, but really we're looking for energy acceleration. Recently we've been using Ho-Oh, but if Blastoise Caldeo starts seeing a lot of play, Ho-Oh is going to be too risky because your energy acceleration is going to end up being 2 free prizes for your opponent whenever they feel like it. So we really need some energy acceleration which is universal and not dependent on something like Ho-Oh, which is going to give up 2 prizes to your opponent. That's where Ether comes in. Now, the way I've been talking about these, I've been talking a little bit they would, they should, etc. And the reason for that is it has been confirmed this week that we are not getting any of these 4 cards in Boundaries Crossed when it is released in a couple of weeks' time. But it's alright, they've put other cards instead. We're getting Pokeball, Great Ball, Potion, Switch, and Energy Search. That's right, the trainers which were already released in black and white. And just as an extra kick to the face, we aren't getting any extra alternate art or anything like that. They are exact reprints of the cards that came out in black and white. I say exact reprints, that's a lie. The set symbol and number will be different. Other than that, they're exactly the same. They've taken out 4 very interesting, exciting, potentially playable trainer cards and replaced them with 5 reprints of cards we've already got. This is just bad. I struggle to find the words to fully articulate how disappointed I am with this, because these are cards that could really have made decks more playable. This is our set that we're getting going into Cities. Cities, and for those of you in the UK, 2 regionals are going to be decided in this format, which means that your Worlds invite could almost be made or broken based around this format. And to take out cards like Ether and Bicycle that could really have made a difference and really made other decks more viable is just horrible. Boundaries Crossed has got some interesting cards. Landorus is going to see play, but it's going to be a little bit like Stunfisk and Terrakion. It's going to be good, but it's not going to be groundbreaking. It's good for donking Dinos, it's good for donking Tynamos, because it's got an attack for 1 fighting energy that does 30 to the active and 30 to 1 on the bench. Stunfisk's Muddy Water with an extra 10 damage. And that's going to be good for donking, but it doesn't have a really big second attack. It can hit for 150 if you discard 2 fighting energy, but you are not going to be able to get those fighting energy back like you would with Ether. It makes Landorus a lot less viable. Which means that you've possibly got Blastoise Caldeo coming in, and then we've got Darkrai variants and Eels, which is all we saw coming around really last format. And by last format I mean the Battle Roads format and how the US did their first lot of regionals. Now, I know that there was some success with Mewtwo, Terrakion builds, etc., and occasionally with Empoleon, but Empoleon's a fragile stage 2 that doesn't have the same advantages something like Hydreigon has, of being able to continually max potion and use a variety of huge attackers. And Mewtwo Terrakion is fine, but as I've said, if you come across a decent Hammers deck that flips alright on the Hammers, you're going to lose to that deck. So, I really am disappointed that we're losing these cards. Now, this leads me to the question of why did this happen? And I've racked my brain and I can genuinely only think of one reason why these cards are cut. If any of you have a different reason, can think of any other reasons, please get in touch with me on Twitter @TheWassy, leave a comment if you're listening to this on YouTube, or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, because I am genuinely stumped. My theory is this. They have looked at the next set and realised we don't have much to go for it. Now, we've always generally been a couple of sets behind Japan, and we've been catching up a little bit recently. We're almost 1 set behind Japan. Going as it is at the moment, our next set would pretty much be Plasma Gale, which Japan only got very recently. There have, however, been a couple of battle strength decks released in Japan. There's some promos that we're missing. I think we could be heading towards a Call of Legends set, whereby we get a bunch of promos, a few random unreleased cards that weren't released earlier for fairly inexplicable reasons, a set that nobody really wants. Now, I could be wrong about this. I have absolutely no proof and no basis for this, other than the fact that I cannot see why these trainers would be cut. The way they were released in Japan, they should be coming out in our next set. They're not coming out in our next set. Now, sometimes this has happened with things like Vileplume, for instance, where they've held it back a set, and, although never confirmed, the rumours are that these cards are a little bit too powerful. We wanted them kept back for a set to protect the format at a particular time. But these trainers aren't that good. I think the next set is going to be a little bit pants. And I think that Pokemon have realised that this next set is going to be a bit pants, so they've kept back these pretty gosh darn good trainer cards to make the next set a little bit better and a little bit more usable. Now, I don't know if it's fair to immediately make the leap from the next set's going to be a bit rubbish, so they've held some trainer back, all the way to the next set's going to be a Call of Legends style reprint set with loads of good stuff. But unless I'm remembering correctly, I believe we have caught up with Japan a little bit. We're basically one set closer to Japan than we used to be. We're getting the stuff printed in Japan one set earlier than we used to get it. And with some of these half decks, etc., coming out, like for instance the ones that got the second black and white Kyurem, I think we could be heading towards a pretty bad set next time round. Now, obviously, I could be wrong about this, and if I am, I will happily admit that I'm wrong. I have no basis for this, I'd like to repeat that. But I'm willing to bet that the next set is not going to be very good, and that's a bit disappointing. Now, what I would say is, I think moves like this are bad for the game. I think it's really bad, and I don't think we should really accept this. I very rarely call for protests or anything like that, and I don't want to sound overly dramatic by saying that. I would like to just ignore this set and buy a couple of singles. Having said that, I've already pre-ordered my box because I collect the sets. I complete all the sets. I have done from Heart Gold Rising Rival, onwards. So I'm certainly not going to boycott the set because I bought a box. What I am going to do is, after that box, complete the set and only buy singles. I won't be buying random packs of this like I often do, because I don't like that they've done this. With a good reason, I'm happy with them holding cards back. Dragon Selection, they held back from our last set, released it as Dragon's Vault. Jobs are good, and I think that's a fair move. I think it was pretty good. I don't like what they've done here, and I hope this set doesn't sell as well, because I really don't like what they've done. But I think I've said I don't like it a little bit too much, so I'll probably move on now. So, my Battle Roads report. I went to a Battle Roads this past weekend over in Sheffield, in Yorkshire, up towards the north of England. Now, my previous Battle Roads, I'd been to St Austell and Horsham the previous weekend, as I told you about last week. I'd played Mewtwo Terrakion, and I liked that deck, but I was always scared of Hammers decks. And then last week in Horsham, I played against two Hammers decks in a row, ended up 1-2, and dropping so I could drive home. So I'd lost faith in that deck. I knew I wasn't going to play it, but I didn't have a clue what to play. And then I thought about Ho-Oh, and I decided to make a deck which was kind of like Mewtwo Terrakion, but I took the Bouffalance out for Tornadus EX because I liked how that could stop setup decks like Darkrai Hydreigon with just a DCE and a Sky Arrow on your Tornadus. And I basically took out my potions and max potions so I could fit in energy switches and Ho-Ohs. I didn't put a bunch of different energies and attackers in there. I kept my attackers just Stunfisk, Terrakion, Tornadus and Mewtwo. And I popped in Fighting Energy with just 3 Psychic Energy and a Sigilyph, so I could use Sigilyph and Mewtwo. And I went to League, I tested it, it ran pretty well, and I decided it's not going to be a huge Battle Roads, about 20 people, probably 4 rounds, no top cut, and then we're out of there. So I made up this deck. And I was driving to the tournament. I went with my friend Becky. She is a very prominent judge around the UK area. She was to be the lone judge that day. And I picked up my good friend George Boone on the way, he of the world's competitor variety. And I was talking in the car, and I realised that my friend Tommy, my good friend Tommy Roberts, if you will, he was going to be playing Ho-Oh. And me and him have played quite a lot in tournaments. I think we're about even now. I forget what the exact score is, but we've won about as many as we've lost. And we've played quite a lot of times. So I decided that I was going to tech my deck against Tommy. So I took out, at the last minute, one of my Tornadus EXs and my Sigilyph, and I replaced them with a Kyurem EX and a Basculin Emerging Powers, and then I switched my free Psychic for free Water. And the reason was, Basculin plus DCE plus energy switching a Water does 80 damage. That one hit KOs a Ho-Oh. So I put in Basculin purely because if I played Tommy, I thought it would be hilarious if I could capture and kill his Ho-Oh with a Basculin. We then get there, I make up my deck, I hand in my deck list, and I find out that rather than being a nice short tournament, it's going to be 5 half-hour single-game rounds, followed by a 1-hour best-of-3 top 4. And because I've driven the judge, I'm staying to the end regardless. At which point, I'm immediately regretting making my deck a little bit silly. But I figure the deck's tested alright, let's have a go, see how we can do. Now I'm again doing this mostly from memory, so I apologise if I stutter a little bit, but here's how my tournament went. Round 1, I'm drawn against a lovely man called Glenn, and I've spoken before about how my favourite places to play in the UK are Nottingham, Sutton Coldfield, and Aldershot. And Glenn is one of the 2 people that runs the Sutton Coldfield Battle Road. And he's playing Groudon, Terrakion, Stunfisk. So we start off, and I go second. Now, as I've gone first once in the past 2 tournaments, I don't expect to go first, and that happens again here. We start off, and the game plays out kind of like it should. I find out quite early on that he's not playing Mewtwo, so I just attack with Tornadus EX and Mewtwo, and I start 2-hitting his Terrakions and his Groudons. Now I do end up using Kyurem here on his Groudon, but I can't get 2 water energy on it, so all I'm actually doing is 2-hitting it, the same as I would with either Mewtwo or Tornadus. So although I use Kyurem, I don't use him particularly usefully, and I'm not playing plus power in this build, so I can't even pull off a fun Basculin trick for the 1-hit KO. But we go through this game, and it really is Tornadus and Mewtwo that make the difference. I'm able to stop him 2-hit KOing Tornadus and Mewtwo at times, using a combination of Eviolite, switching, and resistance on the Tornadus, and I'm able to get 2-hit KOs on most of his stuff. He plays very well, he gets me down to 2 prizes, but because I'm winning the maths round with Tornadus and Mewtwo, I'm always going to end up on top here. Now round 2, I'm embarrassed to say I've forgotten the gentleman's name, but he was a lovely chap, and he's playing Empoleon Roserade without Terrakion. Now this worries me, because when I played Empoleon, I played Ben Stewart Armstead's Terrakion Mewtwo in Sutton Coldfield Battle Roads. It was a game I lost which put me out of cut in that particular tournament. And I was always confident playing against this deck, but I know how easily I can lose. This time, I'm on the other side of the coin, and I know it's a winnable game. Certainly when I played Tommy Roberts Ho-Oh with my Empoleon, he beat me every time by just spamming Mewtwo. But it was, shall we say, a little bit awkward. So we start off, and I see what he's playing, and once again I'm going second. But he doesn't hit the turn to Empoleon. Now unfortunately, I've started Mewtwo. I've got a Tornadus on my bench, and I can get a Sky Arrow, but I can't get a DCE turn 1, and I can't get a switch. Eventually, by turn 3, which is later than I would like, I finally get the DCE Sky Arrow switch catcher, and I capture and kill a Piplup. On turn 4 and 5, I capture and kill 2 more Piplups, by which point he's on to, I think, turn 6, and he still hasn't managed to rare candy into his Empoleon. So I'm getting a little bit of a lucky break here. The problem is I've used 3 catches, and when playing against this deck, I don't want to use all 4 catches, because I know that if I use all 4 catches, he can start switching and retreating Empoleons, max potioning, and stop me ever taking my last prize. So I know there and then that I've taken 3 prizes, I need to get 2 without catchers so that I can clean up the game with my final catcher. At this point, I'm just using Mewtwo and Tornadus to try and 2-hit his Empoleons, because at this point he's rolling, and he is swarming Empoleons pretty darn well. Now I've seen him Pokemon communicate a Mew early game, so I stuck down a second Mewtwo, and I was basically saying to him there that you are not going to be able to use your Mew, it's going to get knocked out. Now he could use his Mew and he could take prizes, but what I made sure that I did was force him into taking his last 2 prizes with Mew. I also used only 2 Pokemon at any one point. This meant that his Empoleon would be hitting for 80. I wagered that he didn't use plus powers, and I was right. That means that hitting for 80, he could not 2-hit KO Tornadus and Mewtwo. So I went 3 prizes up, and I started 2-hitting his Empoleons while he was free for 1 prize, while he was free hitting me for 2 prizes, which meant the math was going to work out in my favour. Except that he plays Max Potion. And, needless to say, he does hit free Max Potion. So I'm killing his Empoleon, but in reality, I'm kind of 3, 4, 5 hitting them because he's being able to get his max potions out. But we go down, and eventually I am down to 2 prizes, and he's down to his last Empoleon. So I know I can knock out his Empoleon, catch something for an easy kill, and I'll win the game. Time is called, I'm down to 1 prize, he's got an Empoleon that's half dead active, and an Empoleon on the bench which is completely safe. What I've done, however, is I've got my last catcher and I've kept it. I was keeping it for this very reason. Time is called, and he's on turn 1, at which point he realises he can KO my Mewtwo, but I've got a Mewtwo with DCE on the bench. He can either not KO my Mewtwo, in which point it's going to go to time and he's going to lose, because he's not going to take enough prizes, or he can KO my Mewtwo, but then I'm going to be able to just retaliate and kill him with my own Mewtwo. So I win that game, but it's very close, very tense, and a lot of my success there was due to his slow start. The round 3, I'm drawn against a lovely lady called Joanna Shirley, which is a dreadful shame in a way, because she is the other person who helps to run Sun Coalfield Battle Roads. Now, Joanna's one of these people that usually plays very inventive decks, hasn't had a huge amount of success in the past, but she always looks so happy when she plays the game. She's one of those players that really brings joy to it. So it was wonderful to see her sitting at 2-0. It was not wonderful to have to play her, especially as she's playing Darkrai Hydreigon, and I know I've got the type advantage in this matchup. It's a matchup I enjoy playing and almost always win, but I don't like playing against people I like, because I don't really like having to beat them. I say having to beat them, that makes me sound very conceited, but I don't like beating people that I like. So we play against her, and again I go second here, as is expected. That makes 1 going first in 10 games as of this point. And she puts down a Mewtwo and attaches. I've got a Mewtwo active. I choose not to attach it, so I bench and attach to a Terrakion. On her turn, she gets a second energy attached to her Mewtwo and hits my Mewtwo for 80, at which point I am able to energy switch onto my Mewtwo, and I then have to Juniper, knowing that if I hit a double colourless energy, I'm alright, but if I don't hit a double colourless energy, I am in a lot of trouble. She's going to go 2 prizes up. So I play the Juniper, I hit the double colourless, I knock out a Mewtwo and go 2 prizes up. The next 2 turns, I'm able to use Ho-Oh to get a second energy on the field, and I'm able to use Terrakion, it's retaliate without taking a KO, to take out 2 Dinos. And from there, it's only a matter of time. She ends me down to 2, I draw dead for a little while, but after a couple of turns, I'm able to get a Terrakion land crushing, and I catch her and KO a Darkrai for the last 2 prizes. Unfortunately, I did run a little bit hot and she did run a little bit cold, but I'm happy to report that she recovered from that to end up 3-2, just missing cut after a very, very close game with George Boone, who actually went 5-0 on the day. Round 4, I'm paired against Charles Barton, and I'm paired down here. Now, I don't like this for 2 reasons. Firstly, I don't like being paired down. It ain't good for your resistance. Secondly, I don't beat Charles. I never beat Charles. When I play Charles, one of 2 things happens. I have terrible luck, or he good old-fashioned outplays me and beats me fair and square. But either way, I know I'm not going to beat him. So we sit down, and I play one of the most frustrating games I've ever played. I drew 20 cards in my deck this game, and I saw 1 supporter. It was a Bianca. I played it for 4 cards, at which point I actually, with a single energy, could have managed to knock out a Darkrai, draw 2 cards for my prizes, and at least make a game of it. I draw Eviolite, Ultra Ball, Sky Arrow, Bridge. I then lose 6-0. I'm completely steamrolled. That is the only supporter I see all game. Can't fault Charles for that. He played a very good game. He played it very well. I'm afraid it's only a shame I couldn't give him more of a game. So at this point, I'm sitting at 3-1, knowing that if I can win my next game, I will cut. And as it turns out, I am paired down again. Now that means I've been paired down twice, which means even if I win, my resistance will be terrible, and the only way I'm going to cut is if there are only 4 4-1s or 5-0s. So I sit down, and it's my good friend Tamao who is playing Darkrai Hammers. And I'm going to be very honest about this game. We sat down. He knew that he couldn't make cut because he was sitting at 2-2. He knew that I could. He immediately said, I scoop, and signed the slip. I didn't ask him to do so. I didn't encourage him to do so. To be honest, he'd signed the slip before I could even give any kind of reaction. It's not something I would ever ask somebody to do for me, nor is it something I would ever do for somebody else usually. However, I thank him for it. It put me into cut if my resistance was good enough. And we then played a very fun game where he played an Arceus deck, and I was roundly beaten, because it turns out Arceus decks are really good against EX decks. So at this point I'm sitting at 4-1. By the way, if you agree or disagree with the decision to scoop to me, etc., if you want to tell me that I basically cheated my way into top cut, etc., I welcome all opinions. You know how to get in touch with me. So I'm sitting there at 4-1 and I do the maths, and it turns out that if George Boone beats Joanna Shirley, he will be the only 5-0. There will then be 3 4-1s, and I will cut. If, however, George Boone loses to Joanna Shirley, there will then be 5 4-1s, and I will almost certainly miss out on resistance. As it turns out, George takes a very close game, and George cuts in first place with Ray Eels. In second place, we have, I believe, Dan Middleton, who cut with Darkrai Hammers. In third place, a lovely guy whose name escapes me now. I apologise for that, playing Darkrai Hydreigon, and myself playing Mewtwo, Teraki, and Ho-Oh. So I'm drawn against George Boone in top 4, and I like this because Ray Eels is a pretty good matchup for me. Game 1, I finally win the flip. I win the flip, and I'm very happy because he starts Lone Dynamo. Now I start Mewtwo with no energy at all. So to give myself the best chance of the donk here, I Ultra Ball for a Stunfisk, switch my Mewtwo to a Stunfisk and play a Juniper. That means instead of drawing one of my 4 double colourless off a Juniper, I have to draw one of my 7 fighting energy. As it turns out, I draw both the fighting and the double colourless, and I'm afraid I donk his Lone Dynamo to go 1 game up. Game 2, I again get a turn 1 Stunfisk with some switching action, and I'm able to take out a Dynamo on my first turn, and although he then evolves all of his Dynamos up to Electrics the next turn, I'm able to capture and use Rumble to kill a second Dynamo. Now at this point, it all goes a little bit strange because I cannot draw a supporter for the life of me in this game. In the entire game, I play 1 Cherin, 1 Bianca for 3 cards, 1 N fairly early on, and 1 N late on when I've got 2 prizes. And they're the only supporters I play in a fairly long, drawn-out game. So I'm struggling for resources from the very beginning here. And as we go through, I start hitting his Rayquazas. And I end up in a situation where he's got 2 Rayquazas on the field with 90 damage, and he's got a Raikou. And he actually manages at one point in the game to hit 4 tails in a row with Victini out on Thunderfang, which allows me to 2-hit KO his Raikou with my Mewtwo. It then comes down to he's got 2 Rayquazas, both with 90 damage on. I've got 2 Terrakion, both with energy on, ready to retaliate if he takes a KO, and I've got a Mewtwo rolling. He starts doing some very creative play, and he had a very complicated plan to win, but unfortunately, he was unable to draw what he needed to. He kept hitting tails every time he needed a heads, and eventually I'm able to get a Land Crush going to knock out his Rayquaza, and go into the final against Daniel Middleton playing Darkrai Hammers. These games were very uneventful. In these games, we couldn't hit heads between us. He won 2-0. In both games, he hit no crushing hammers. I went the Tornado through every game and hit tails every time at 5 or 6 on Power Blast. And after winning game 1 convincingly, in game 2, I've got a chance to KO a Darkrai with Land Crush, but my Terrakion is confused. If I hit heads on Confusion, I take out his Darkrai and free energy, and I've got a good chance of making a comeback. If I don't, I'm not going to be able to win. I play a Juniper, I whiff the switch, otherwise I could have switched to a Tornadus and free retreated with a Sky Arrow. So I know that I've got to win the flip, or I'm going to lose the game. And of course, I hit tails on Confusion and I lose. But Dan played the game absolutely flawlessly. I was, quite frankly, well beaten. Slightly disappointing as I'd made this deck because I was worried about the vulnerability of my old deck to hammers, but hey ho, that's what happens. Now, I did get an interview with Dan at the end of this tournament where he told me about his deck choice, how he managed to pull out the win, and his prediction for what is probably the best card in Boundaries Crossed. Unfortunately, I recorded this with somebody else's audio equipment, and they haven't sent me the interview file. So although that interview does exist, I'm afraid I'm going to have to include it on next week's podcast because I don't have access to it today. So the last thing I want to talk about today is a little bit of forum gossip, which again relates to Boundaries Crossed. Now, in Boundaries Crossed, we are getting a new type of card. These are called Ace Spec Trainer cards. I've talked about these quite a bit before. And they are particularly powerful trainer cards that you're only allowed one of in your deck. That's one Ace Spec total, not one of each Ace Spec. And one of these is Computer Search. This allows you to discard 2 cards from your hand and search your deck for any card. And with the new Skylar supporter, which allows you to search for any trainer, this is going to be used very, very widely. Now, this is a reprint of a card that we saw right back in base set that was also used, which is also called Computer Search, and which also allowed you to discard 2 cards from your hand and search your deck for any card. And what has been putting people in a little bit of a tiz, shall we say, is the fact that you're not allowed to use base set Computer Search instead of the new shiny Computer Search. Now, this annoys people like me because I like my base set cards. I use base set Energy, I use base set Switch. I have a bunch of old base set Computer Search and I was planning to use these. Just to prove that there are other people like me out there, I checked Troll and Toad before I recorded this podcast, and the old base set Computer Search are sold out. And I can only imagine that's because of people buying them up. It has, however, been confirmed that the old Computer Search will not be tournament legal. Now, this is potentially a bit of a problem because Computer Search is going to see play. There are 4 Ace Spec trainers coming out. There are 1 for White Kyurem, 1 for Black Kyurem. None of them are that good. One gives one of them extra HP, the other one gives the other one a bit more attack power. There's, I think it's called Gold Potion, which heals 90 damage, which is almost as good as a max potion at times. But to be honest with you, that's not going to see a huge play. Almost every single deck in the format, especially Darkrai and Eels decks, let's face it, they're the main 2, are going to be playing a copy of Computer Search. And now you're going to have the new shiny one from the new set, which is a little bit of a pain. Now, you are only going to need 1 per deck because you can only play 1, so nobody's going to need more than 1. But pretty much everybody is going to need 1. So the question is, why has this happened? Now, the cynical answer here is for money. Now, we don't know how rare they're going to be. I know that at Worlds there were Japanese players who were selling these Japanese Computer Searches for $5. They are as rare in Japan as a regular rare. And if they're that rare over here, this really isn't going to be a problem. You buy a box, you'll almost certainly get one in the box, and even if you don't, they're going to go for maybe $10, $15. They're not going to be prohibitively expensive, so it's not going to be the end of the world. However, EX cards, I believe, are rarer than Japanese EXs. I wouldn't be surprised if Ace Spec trainers became 1 per box. Again, this is something I have no proof of, or any reason for, other than a hunch. But if these do turn into 1 per box, as in 1 Ace Spec trainer per box, we're then looking at 1 Computer Search for every 4 boxes. And that's going to make them very, very rare and very, very expensive, and that's not going to make people very happy. So the cynical answer is, Pokemon want to make more money, they're making this card quite rare, and by not letting you use the old version, they're getting more money. Now, I have already berated Pokemon in this podcast. I don't believe this is why they're doing it. I think it's purely because ease of use. Because they've turned all their trainers into all their supporters and stadiums, etc., into items. It's going to be easier, especially for kids, and that's who Pokemon always aim these things at, let's be fair. It's going to be easier for kids if they've just got, these shiny cards, you can have 1 in your deck. And that's my prediction for why it is. Now, there's a potential argument that this could avoid cheating, because it's a lot harder to put 2 big shiny cards in your deck than 2 other ones. And it's going to be, if you play against an inexperienced player, you could try and convince them that you're allowed 2 of these cards in your deck. Some people have said that you should be able to play the old Computer Search with a reference, but that's kind of pointless, because you would need a new Computer Search to act as a reference, which means you'll need to buy a new Computer Search, and as you can only put 1 in your deck, why don't you just put the new one in your deck? Now, there is precedent for being allowed to use an old card, even though this new one's an Ace Spec trainer. Bill used to be a trainer, it's now a supporter, but the old trainer Bill, which it's been rotated out now, but the old trainer Bill was still legal, it was just a supporter. Super Rod is still legal, the old one, which does nothing like what the new Super Rod does. The old Revive is massively different, but because it's called Revive, we're still allowed to use it. EXP All is still legal, even though it's not actually called EXP Share anymore, but it does the same thing. So it was certainly open to Pokemon to allow us to use these old base set computer searches. For whatever reason, they've decided not to, and that's their prerogative. It's a little bit annoying, but I think we'll all get over it. I hope it doesn't become particularly expensive. I don't want another Mewtwo, Darkrai or Luxray debacle. Having said that, on Troll and Told at the moment, Landorus is being pre-ordered for $40 or $50, depending whether you get the regular or full art. So it looks like Landorus could be that card in this set anyway. So I do hope computer search doesn't go that way. However, the set is released in 2 weeks today, in fact, as I record this. So we'll know very shortly how rare this is actually going to be. And as we're up to 40 minutes, I think that's just about enough time for today. Hopefully you all know a little bit more about the Boundaries Crossed shenanigans, and please do tune in again next week when I'll be taking a good look at the Boundaries Crossed set as a whole. As always, please get in touch with me in the usual manners, finding me on Twitter at TheWassy, or emailing me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or if you're listening to this on Pokemon Dan's YouTube channel, just leave a comment and I will pick it up as usual. Thanks as always to Six Prizes, Deck, and to Pokemon Dan himself, and a congratulations to him for winning that Sheffield Battle Road. My name is Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.
Well, thank you for that, Ross. It was both informative and stimulating.